Hi, thanks for coming. So, I am a survivor of sexual violence, and it is said that the personal is political and that the body is a political battleground. For my senior project, I decided to listen and reflect on the stories of others while exploring my own trauma, healing, and voice as a survivor. My senior project ended up culminating in a final exhibition in the Blum Gallery. So to give some background, my time here at COA, I've spent mostly studying art, poetry, and Spanish. 3 years ago, I took the immersion program with Professor Carla Peña, and this helped me listen to the voices of others whose stories have been written out of history by dominant culture, but it also helped me find my own voice. Learning Spanish and a new language allowed me to speak and get over the shame and fear of speaking. And through this helped me realize another language I was learning my whole life, a language I like to call my survivor's language. 2 years ago, I started a support group here on campus for survivors of sexual violence, and this ignited a personal passion for activism around issues of sexual violence and trauma recovery. So the past 2 winters I spent in Mexico trying to recreate an immersive experience. This was to help me better my Spanish, also to study art, poetry, and transnational feminism, which acted as research for my project. I talked with women across Mexico, listening to their stories and personal testimonios. I visited various feminist organizations, women's rights advocacy groups, and completed my personal dream of visiting La Casa Azul de Frida Kahlo and her home with Diego Rivera. Just for those who don't know, Frida Kahlo is a Mexican surrealist painter who uses her own story and personal pain and struggle as a woman for inspiration for her art. So I decided to study testimonios because they are seen as survival stories. They are personal responses from within, but also focus on a collective consciousness, especially of third world women who's looking to reveal a historic truth that has been erased by imperialist history. So I wanted to learn how to listen and listen to those who are not included in hegemonic discourse, and also examine how white Western feminism has a non-intersectional ideology. And so while my art draws a lot of inspiration from the art and testimonials of women that I spoke with in Mexico, I can only speak for myself, and my lived experiences. So therefore, this is my own personal testimonial that also reflects on the many stories that have been told to me. The reason I chose art and that I work with art is because it's a form of expression, and this form of creative expression is also a form of trauma recovery and reclaiming the body and the voice. Art is also universal communication that is more accessible to a broader audience. And it also deconstructs the intellectualization of the human experiences and focuses on raw emotion that invites the unconscious to go places that it wouldn't really go otherwise. So I chose to work with various mediums as modes for finding my voice and expressing these complex and highly charged subjects and ideas such as sexual violence, femicide, trauma recovery, self-reclamation, etc. So I experimented with my body as a medium and as a canvas. I explored concepts of voice and vulnerability and stories through various forms of artistic expression. So I decided to do block printmaking with linoleum, where I experimented with my own menstrual blood as ink. This allowed me to look at the beauty, the depth, and the human connection of menstrual blood, also how it's viewed and how it's stigmatized. I then created a piece that acted as a border throughout the exhibition, which had many elements. One was I did wintergreen oil transfers of personal excerpts from my journal while I was traveling in Mexico. I also had poetry and translations that I was working on, written on blood paper. And the poetry and translations also allowed me to become more proficient in my Spanish, explore the art of translation, looking at concepts of interpretation and misinterpretation, but also to find and express my voice in 2 languages. I then decided to do some body printmaking, where I made a body-safe paint with egg tempera and beetroot. So this allowed me to fully explore my body as art. I looked at how skin and scars transfer themselves also wanted to look at movement and markings that the body makes and how those movements and marks are interpreted. I then also decided to work with photography and mixed media, where I looked at my body through an intimate lens that I had never looked at my body before. This was my largest means of reclaiming my body for myself. I again explored scars and flesh and how we reflect on the self in the body through language and words, how we are cut up, categorized, and packaged for consumption. Those little black dots actually are clumps of my hair that I collected for months. And then, lastly, I did an installation looking at femicide. So just to give some context, femicide is a sexual and gender-based hate crime that is broadly defined as the killing of women by men simply because they are women. It's a phenomenon that's closely linked with sexual violence. So violence against women constitutes as the most common crime in the world, with the highest level of immunity for perpetrators. Every year, there are over 66,000 women that are violently killed globally, usually raped and mutilated. So the rates of femicide differ depending on the specific country, but of the countries with the top 25 highest rates of femicide, 50% of those countries are in Latin America. In the United States, there are accounts of over 4 deaths of women daily. In Mexico, there are accounts of over 6 deaths of women daily. So this installation, looking at the issue of femicide, I was looking to transform the space to more fully engage the audience in a tangible way that created a very visceral and sensory experience. I had a sound component where I did a mesh-up of the interviews of women that I talked with, and then I had clothes on a clothesline that was soaked in water, that was dripping ink, of 930 roses that I printed on these clothes. So the 930 roses represent the number of women that were murdered in the United States and in Mexico during my time looking at issues of femicide in Mexico. So because my project has many different facets, I worked with various peoples and professors who I'd like to thank here. I actually didn't include Zach Soares on here, who helped me so much with my sound component, so thanks, Zach. So overall, the results of my learning, in the end, I created a space in the gallery with my work to invite an outside audience to come and reflect on what art and language can transmit under the context of sexual violence and trauma recovery. What I learned is very difficult to reduce, but what I learned most is I learned how to listen. I learned how to listen more intently. And I learned that listening is not only opening up yourself, but it's also learning how to ask better questions. I also learned more about myself and self-reclamation, became more proficient in Spanish, learned a lot about transnational feminism, femicide, and sexual violence advocacy. So right now, my next steps in the future, I kind of just wish to reflect on my work, on my voice and vulnerability, and that of others, and allow this work to ripen and season with time. But in the immediate future, I'm moving out to a great Cranberry Island and working on a community project out there with alum Sarah McCracken called the Island Ecology Project, which I'm very excited about, but also continue to write poetry, make art, and share my voice with the world. Thanks for listening.